So, Mum, tell me about your book.
When America went to war with England, many of the clergy had a crisis of conscience, if you like, and they ran away out to Canada. So this left a vacuum. But in this vacuum, this power vacuum, you had a lot of the Methodists, the Baptists, and the Quakers in that. They arose because now they could preach, and they used to preach around the water holes.
Yeah.
But don't think that they were united. They hated each other, and they called each other the locusts of the apocalypse. What the book is about is it's based on the autobiography of Barton Stone, who was the key person in the big awakening that happened at Cambridge in 1803.
So it sounds like, despite many of the clergy draining out to Canada, there was plenty of religion in America. So my question is, if there was plenty of religion in America, why did America need to wake up?
Because there was even more debauchery. The religious elements were small fringes on the outside that people were interested in.
It doesn't sound like they were having a lot of effect on society at large.
They
Sounds like they were too busy calling each other locusts of the apocalypse.
Oh, absolutely. And Barton Stone, what he said, he had some older brothers because the family, there were two marriages, and he had his older brothers had gone to war. And when they came back from the war, they were really changed, and this was normal. And the soldiers came back very debauched. And he said, he doesn't go into it, but he said that they brought back vices that hitherto the communities had not known. Not only had they brought back terrible vices, and they were, debauched and lazing around, and they weren't working, and they were gambling and cockfighting, and generally being problematical.
Stuff we don't even want to go into.
Stuff we don't want to even go into here. But not only were they doing that, but because they had conquered, they came back as conquering heroes, and the society at large worship.
Would it be fair to say that they were almost the celebrity class of their time?
They were, and they were the influencers of the time too.
Wow. Yeah.
Because you get a soldier come in and his younger brother.
And they had done a magnificent job to take on the superpower of the age and win.
They had done a magnificent job. And they probably, a lot of them were actually suffering from post-trauma sort of thing.
Yeah,
but
PTSD.
They don't even talk about that sort of thing. So there was possibly that as well. But especially when you've got younger men coming up, and they're looking at these conquering heroes, and they're coming back, and they're doing all this sort of stuff. Well, the little Methodists at the watering hole are not going to have much pull. But we start the story in his childhood, which is where he started his autobiography, which I've based a lot of the book on. And he was about 11, I think, at the time, and it was towards the tail end of the Revolutionary War.
Oh, wow. So this is actually, this is not just a book about religion. This is very significant period in American history.
Oh, absolutely. I felt the run-up to it when I was reading his original autobiography, which was quite tough to read. That's why I've rewritten it, and I've written it more like a novel style. What I got from it is that I was going through this, and I was writing this at the tail end of COVID. And because COVID has had such a big upheaval on our society, the fabric of our society, I was amazed at the parallels I was seeing between the tail end of the Revolutionary War, which is where he really picks up his story when he's a boy. I saw tremendous patterns. It actually gave me a lot of hope.
Did it?
It did, because I was sort of, you see all of these things rising, which you think this is very negative. And it made me realise, wow, we're actually lining up. The thing that we should be looking for next is not the complete disintegration of society and being taken over by some hideous
tyranny.
But what we should be looking for is revival. We should be expecting a big move of God, because you see it in history over and over, and in our own personal lives too. And miracles usually start with something pretty awful. We had our own personal mayhem. Because as you know, your father was invited to do a PhD in America, which was a miracle in itself. But we had, it's not easy to just go from New Zealand or any country to another country when you only had one contact, and the only contact that we had was the professor who had invited us.
Yeah.
And we had 4 kids. You kids were ranging from 17 down to 9, and we needed a landing pad, and we had limited money too. So we needed somewhere to go, and we needed accommodation that was furnished, as even just for a short period of time, enough for us to get in there, to find rent, to get our feet underneath us.
And we had no friends in America.
We had no friends at all. We had no contacts at all. Just this one professor, and he wasn't going to be any use
To the family.
No, as far as that was going. And so we were praying about it, and we were laying it before God, and we were saying, Lord, we need contacts, we need help. We don't know how to do this.
I remember we were particularly concerned about losing the Williams, who are our best friends.
Oh, that's right, because we had a homeschooling family that had 5 children. And the kids were really concerned about that because they were so special. And so we were praying for 2 specific things, and that was for accommodation, fully furnished accommodation, and a homeschooling family of 5 children. And then Ruth got even more specific. She asked that the accommodation that we went into, because we believe in specific prayers, the accommodation that we went into
would have an upstairs with dormer windows.
Yeah, 4 bedrooms upstairs, 3 of the bedrooms in the
with the dormer windows. I must have seen one of those
underneath the gables.
I must have seen one of those houses on TV or something.
Yeah,
America's kind of famous for its architecture.
Yeah. They weren't dormer windows. They were like under the gables.
Oh yeah.
Under the steep gables. So anyway, she was very specific about that. So we were praying about that, and we didn't realise it at the time. But when the mayhem hit, boom, that was actually the beginning of the miracle. At the time, it looked like the end.
So what was the mayhem?
Well, what the mayhem was that your father was working over the Christmas period, and he was walking across the quarry floor, and suddenly he was hit by this most horrendous headache.
It didn't build up either.
No,
came out of nowhere.
And he said it felt like his head was being put in a clamp. So he rang me because a friend had said, because he'd been fasting that day, and he said, oh no, it's a coffee headache or something like that. And he said, Well, I thought, he rang me and said, I've had this come on. My thought was, he's got meningitis. So I said to him,
You knew it was serious.
I knew it was serious. And I said to him, if they won't bring you in right now, because I said, I don't want you driving, I said, I'm coming straight out to get you.
Yeah.
Well, they brought him in, and we took him to White Cross. And they looked at him, and they said, if it gets worse, take him up to the hospital.
Yeah.
So we went home, and it got a lot worse, a lot quicker. So I put him in the car, and I was driving, he was in the passenger seat, and we were driving towards A&E of the hospital, and he was writhing with pain.
Yeah.
Absolutely writhing. But in between the writhing, it was kind of like labour, because in between the writhing, he would have little patches that
Also,
he didn't have it.
He's not a baby about pain.
I know.
So this was...
He'll just kind of ignore it, so it was really weird.
It was really bad.
And I knew it was really, really serious. I knew. And we got to a certain, and this is the interesting thing about God, you can actually usually remember the exact spot where God comforts you. And we got to a certain point. We were at this crossroads at this intersection, we were waiting for the lights to change to go up to the hospital. And I just felt God sort of, figuratively speaking, wrap his hands around my emotions of my heart. And I felt, this is of God, and I had this mental picture come into my mind of God's big finger in Ian's head. And he turns to me, and I thought, this has got something to do with America.
And you didn't mention this to Dad.
No. And I thought, it was a crazy thing to think, and to think it had something to do with America.
Yeah,
at that point,
that's insane, Mum. At that point, that was insane.
At that point, your father went into sort of like a little lull, and he turned to me, and he said, this seems really weird, but he said, I think this has got something to do with America, going to America. And I said, I know, that's exactly what I think. I said, I don't think this is of the devil or anything like this. I said, this is supernatural, and I just see God's finger in your head. And interestingly enough, to back up a little bit, about a day beforehand, or the night beforehand, I had heard your father, snoring as he does. And he was annoying me. And it just came floating across my mind, just be glad that he's alive. And then we had an issue with the dishwasher that had broken down. And I had that morning, before this thing had happened, I had called the repairman in because it looked like it was like a real serious problem.
Lots of flashing lights.
Lots of flashing lights, and it wasn't pumping and everything like that. And when he came in, he went straight over to the dishwasher, he turned the dishwasher on, and there was nothing wrong with it. Now I knew that there had been something wrong with that dishwasher. And so when I get something weird like that, I put a little ring around it in my mind, and I had in the back of my mind, that's weird.
We don't really do coincidences.
No, I don't do coincidence.
In this family.
Oh, when you're looking for God's direction, you don't do coincidence. And anyway, that had happened in the morning. So when this all happened and we got, and I felt it was sort of, I don't like the word premonition, but it sort of had alerted me to something was perhaps coming, I didn't know what. So anyway, we got up to the hospital and into A&E, and they took us in straight away, which wasn't a good sign. And Ian had said to me, as we were driving up, he said, I feel like my brain is bleeding. And we got up into A&E, they took him straight in. I still thought he had meningitis. And they looked at him and they said to him, well, you've either got a severe migraine, he didn't get migraines, or you've got meningitis, or you've got bleeding in the brain. And Ian said, that's it. He said, I've got bleeding in the brain. And I saw the doctor's eyes fly open, and I saw and I thought, that's not good. So they were going to give him a lumbar puncture, and I knew that was very painful. So I said to the Lord, oh, please, not a lumbar puncture. I just said it silently. With that, this helicopter came down. They had to delay it. And when they came back, they said, no, we're not going to give you a lumbar puncture. We're sending you straight down to Auckland, because we were in like a provincial hospital.
So never good to get sent to Auckland. You get sent to the Auckland hospital.
So he was put in the ambulance, and I was dispatched to go home.
Because if you get sent to Auckland in New Zealand, that means it's really serious, and they are sending you to the biggest hospital, the most advanced hospital. Yeah. I mean, it's a great hospital, but you don't really want to be sent.
This is an honour you don't really want. You kids had gone to some friend's place. They told us in the hospital that he could die at any moment. Yep. They tried to they got a drip into him because they said that they come to the conclusion he had an aneurysm. Yep. And that he could die at any moment. And you kids were ranging from 17 down to 9. And I said to my friend, I said, put all the kids on the phone one by one. I said the same thing to each one of you. I said, they've found bleeding in Dad's brain. They're taking him to hospital down in Auckland. I'm going with him. You'll be staying with Susie. But I said, do not be afraid, because this is a divine encounter from God, and divine encounters are not always pleasant. And I really believed it. I really believed it. So as I was driving down, and by this time it was about midnight, and I was driving down and alone, and I said to the Lord, as we're driving down, I said, Lord, you have given me a really wonderful life, and Ian and I have had a wonderful time, but we are your servant, and if you choose to take him, that will be painful, but I surrender it to you. And when I got there, they ushered me into where he was, and they gave me a chair. I sat beside him. Yep. And they were coming all through the night to check if he was still, they would check him on the hour to see if he still could,
They did a great job.
Yeah.
The medical staff were excellent.
Yeah. While I was sitting, waiting there in the chair, I had quickened back to me, the dishwasher came flooding into my mind. And the thought that came to me, which I felt the thought had come from God, was that you're going to go through, it's like the dishwasher, you're going to go through a very frightening time for a short period of time, but at the end of it, there's going to be nothing wrong. So I told Ian that, and he used to be saying sort of things, so that really comforted me. And my mother had gone, probably 10 years previously, she had a brain tumour, and she had been down in this, because he was taken to the head trauma sort of area. She had been in this area in the hospital, and she had had surgery for a brain tumour, and she and my father had amazing miracles and things happen where they were able to talk to a lot of people and help a lot of people.
This miracles coming from Mayhem is a little bit of a family
Yes.
theme, you might have noticed by now.
So, you know, so in the back of my mind, I was like on the alert. Oh, who is God sending us down that we need to help?
Yeah.
So that was in the back of my mind because I sort of thought, oh gosh, this is a rerun of Mum with a brain tumour and that. And I knew all this wonderful stories she'd had from that. So I was expecting miracles and that. So we're sitting there and the doctor came in the wee hours of the morning.
Or at least divine encounter.
At least divine encounters, you know. So the doctor came in the wee hours of the morning and he said, do you know what's happened to you? And we said, no. And he said, well, you've had an aneurysm. We think you've had an aneurysm. And what that is, it's like a stroke. It's where a blood vessel's broken in your brain or something. But he said, you know,
Rare, they're rare.
very rare and that. And I said to him, was there anything that could have triggered this? And he said, well, if you drink or you smoke, which Ian didn't either, it raises your possibility just
A smidge.
a little bit. But he said, really, what's happened is you've just had really, 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 really bad luck.
Oh, we don't do bad luck in this
I
family.
looked at that doctor and I didn't say it. But in my head, I was saying, really, really, really bad luck. My foot.
Yeah.
This is a divine encounter from God.
Yep.
And that. And we're just at the yuck part. So the next morning, we were taken up, he was admitted into the area where they had the brain surgeries and
Yeah.
and up to that point we'd be kind of fairly chipper. And we got in there and there were 20 beds. And one half of the ward was for the head-on car accidents and the other ones was for the aneurysms. And
Was it confronting?
it was confronting. Your father was not that bad, didn't seem that bad at that point. And a doctor came and they said to us, you know, what the situation is that we think you've had an aneurysm. We're going to give you a CAT scan tomorrow. And they said, if we can go in through the leg, it'll be 6 weeks, not driving and that. But if it's full-out brain surgery, it'll be 6 months and it will be rehabilitation and that. And that was the only time I saw your father's wheels fall off a little bit over the driving thing, and he thought, oh, you're driving and everything. But he was really calm.
Yeah.
And that. So then they left. So there was only enough energy between your father and I. We were in this little bubble. It was like the peace of God was wrapped around us, but we only had enough peace of God for the two of us.
Yeah.
We didn't have enough for anybody else. So we're sitting here, and we were looking at our options, and I came to the conclusion that we would probably go through the whole thing. So, because thinking about my mother with brain surgery and that.
Yeah.
So I looked at your father and I said, well, Dales, I said, I thought we were going to America.
Yeah.
I knew God was calling us to something different. I thought we were going to America, but it looks like we're going into hard days and rehabilitation.
Yeah.
And he said yes. So I said, well, whatever God wants. You know,
He's the boss.
He's the boss. We're sitting there, this happened in the morning, so we were sitting there and we were discussing this the whole day. And this went on because we were waiting to hear, he had a CAT scan and we were waiting to hear the diagnosis as to which of the two that we were going at. And by this time I had completely forgotten the dishwasher and my promise that that we were going to come out the side, nothing wrong.
You'd forgotten the prophesying dishwasher.
So I completely lost sight of that. So we sat all day working out the nuts and bolts of how we were going to deal with this mayhem that had come into our life.
Yeah.
I don't think they forgot about us. Because we got to about 7 o'clock in the evening and we hadn't heard. And then that must have been the New Year's Eve because one of the guys, the surgeons, he came walking past and he'd been talking about going off to a party and he walked past us, saw us, and then he kind of, his memory, you could see his memory was jolted and he came back and he said, oh, by the way.
Yeah,
Casual sort of,
just
by the way.
mention it. I'll just mention it.
We've had a look at your CAT scan and it's come up, he said you haven't had an aneurysm. What you've had is you've had a small tear in part of the brain or anything, and you've had a small amount of bleeding, what we'll do tomorrow is that we'll put you through the CAT scan again, and if it's stabilised and everything, you can go home. I don't think it's going to be an issue. So relief flooded our souls. It was like, oh. And that was when I remembered the dishwasher. Oh, thank you, Lord, it's the dishwasher. So by this time it was about 7:30 at night. And it must have been a Monday when this had happened, because we'd been fasting. And so by this time it was Tuesday evening at about 7:30, and I hadn't had anything to eat for about 48 hours. We'd had friends who lived in Auckland, invited us to stay, that we could have gone there. But they lived an hour down the motorway, and I was concerned by this stage that after all of the emotional upheaval and everything, and it was a big city, and that I might not be very safe. So I said to I just shot up an arrow prayer, and I just said to the Lord, Lord, help, I don't know what to do about this. Well, I said to Ian, I said, well, I'm going to leave you now, and I'm going to go down to the cafe and try and get something to eat. So I went down there, and a nurse came and spoke to me, and she said, have you got anywhere to stay for the night? And I said to her, so I explained the situation. She said, don't worry about that. We've got a home, especially for people that are, out of towners. She said, I'll see if there's a vacancy for you. So she rang them up. Oh, yes, there was. Especially for people that are, out of towners. She said, I'll see if there's a vacancy for you. So she rang them up. Oh, yes, there was. So anyway, I went to this Ronald house. So I got up the next morning. They had like it was a dining room area. It was a big room, and it had these tables set up. I sat down, and there was a woman there. And we struck up a conversation. And that was all very nice and that. So then I went back to as soon as the doors opened in the hospital, which was about 11 or something like that, I went back to collect your father and to bring him out. Well, nothing happened. Well, they were delayed, that he was fine, he could go.
But they didn't release him.
They didn't release him. So we're getting a bit fed up, to be honest. It comes to lunchtime. Well, they bring him lunch, and I said to him, because we didn't know how long we were going to wait, well, I'm going back to the hostel. So I went back to the hostel. It's right on lunchtime, and this time it's really, really busy. And all the tables were really quite busy. And I looked around, and this friend that I'd made in the morning, she saw me come in. And she said, oh, Wendy, she said, come over here. And I didn't know this at the time.
Was this about the grey-haired lady?
Yes.
Yeah,
you want to tell that part?
Yeah, because when we were staying with our friend, Susie Barlow, she came to me, and this was when we thought Dad could snuff it. And she said, I've had this dream about this grey-haired lady, this little grey-haired lady, and I don't know who she is, but I think she's going to be significant.
And she pointed to the seat beside her, and it was and I sat between her and this little elderly grey-haired lady. So I struck up a conversation with this other lady, and as we were talking,
the grey-haired lady,
and I had a feeling that she knew God. So I sort of dug around a little bit, and yes, I could feel it and that. And so we started talking about it, and she said, so I told her what had happened and how we had been planning to go to America for your father to do a PhD, and at the height of the terribleness of it, it looked like it wasn't going to happen, but now he'd had the clearance, and it looked like he was going to be all right. So I was just telling her the backstory, and she said to me, whereabouts was he going to do the PhD? And I said, a little place in Connecticut. And she said, whereabouts in Connecticut? And I said, a little place called Stores at Yukon. She and her daughter was sitting there as well. They go, Stores, Yukon. Turned out that her son-in-law had gone there, her daughter and son-in-law had gone there, and he had done a PhD at Yukon Stores. Bearing in mind that this is probably the only person in New Zealand that ever went to the Yukon University in Stores.
There are not a lot of New Zealanders.
And they don't do American PhDs. No. And she told me what the campus was like, she told me what the area was like. And then I saw the moment come into their mind, the same thing. Now, they had no idea what we had been praying. They had no idea. I never told them. And they said, you have to meet the Trickards. They're an American homeschooling family with 5 children. So then the mother turns to the daughter and she says, do you have their phone number? She said, I think I might. So she trotted back to her room, came back with the phone number, and that gave me the phone number. And she said, ring Sarah and tell her the story. So with that, I got a phone call saying that they'd released Ian and that I was to go and pick him up. And then after we'd picked up your kids and everything and came home, Ian rang Sarah, and when she first heard his accent, she said, oh, Chris! And he said,
Who was Chris?
Chris was the guy that they knew who had gone over there, the son-in-law.
Oh, had done the PhD.
Yeah, and that was the connection. She said, oh, she heard the accent and she said, oh, Chris, and your father said, sort of, but not really. And so I explained the situation, and when she heard the story, she said, oh, this is of God. And she said, I'll find accommodation for you. So we started emailing backwards and forwards, and you kids started emailing their kids, and Rachel sent a lot of letters and stuff like this. And she said to us, she said, I've found accommodation for you. And and she said, we'll pick you up at the airport and we'll take you to the accommodation. So we arrived in America. Sarah picked us up, and she took us to this accommodation, which was in a little camp meeting association, which had grown directly out of the Cane Ridge awakening. It was
Descended from it.
It was descended from the Cane Ridge awakening.
And we got miracles there.
And
we're not going to go into them because this video is already long. But
Yeah,
we got a lot.
So many. And here's the kicker. Here's the kicker to it. When we came in and we saw this cute little cottage that we came into, there were 4 bedrooms. One of them was downstairs, and 3 of them were were up in the second story and under the gables.
So, how did this book come about?
So we had so many miracles.
And it kind of messed with our head.
It messed with our head, just like
what was going on at
what
that
was going
place? What was going on?
What was going on at that place and that whole period. It messed with our head, just like the people who were involved with Cane Ridge. They never got over it till the end of their life. They had questions. And I've never really got over this because it was so amazing, and
it had the fingers of God
it had
all
the
over
fingers
it.
of God.
And you know,
all over
I
it.
think sometimes there is a temptation to think miracles happened in the Bible. Miracles happened in the past. But this proves that God is still a very, very busy boy.
Oh, absolutely, because this was only the start of, as you alluded to, this was only the start of the miracles. So it was had such a profound, it's not like we were unused to miracles either.
No, but these were next level.
But these were next level. And the whole time there, it was next level. So I was left pondering on it, just like these guys were. What happened? What happened in that campground? What was going on? And that led me on a journey years later to actually track back the history of it.
And make sense of the place.
And this is where I found this was
the root.
This was the root.
And I think we can conclude from this that God started something in America, and it hasn't really stopped growing, and we had a slight brush against it.
And all I can say is that he's not finished yet, and be expecting something exciting.
Be expecting miracles.
Be expecting miracles.
That's beautiful, Mum. So where can people get your book, Miracles and Mayhem,
Well,
Wendy Hamilton?
They can get it on Amazon, or where good books are sold, you can order it in, or on our family website, zealous.com.
Zealous Publishing.
Oh, sorry, zealouspublishing.com.
How do you spell zealous?
It's ZEALAUS.
Why? Because we're dyslexics?
New Zealanders, that's the zeal part. Living in Australia, that's the Oz part.
So that spelling mistake is on purpose, and we don't want any letters. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Mum.
Thank you. Bye.